Started shortly. Excited to talk to you guys today, but yeah, we'll get started in 1 minute. We'll be getting started in 1 second, don't worry. All right, let's get this going. Welcome to another episode of Bad Takes in Football. This is your host, Bad Takes, here for your fourth official episode of, again, Bad Takes in Football. Just to go over a quick little housekeeping items. Again, this is a new show. Would really appreciate if you could like, subscribe, comment. I have chat going, so feel free to tell me your takes in chat, in the comments. Would love to hear your takes on my takes or just any ideas or thoughts you would have on topics you'd like me to discuss. For today's show, we have a bunch of exciting topics to talk about. I think everyone is aware of the situation going on with the Dallas Cowboys, more specifically, the drama with the contract talks in between Micah Parsons and the owner slash GM, Jerry Jones. Jerry Jones never is someone to be without drama, and we'll see more of that today. Another topic that we'll be discussing today will be the Cincinnati Bengals. So Cincinnati, they are in some trouble right now. Obviously, it's the beginning of training camp, so they have some time to fix things. But currently, Trey Hendrickson has posted on social media that he is in Florida. He has left Cincinnati. Contract talks didn't go so well as recently as 2 days ago. We'll go over a couple other news around the NFL, things like Tyrann Mathieu retiring, also Alex Anzalone's contract disputes in Detroit, amongst a few other things, right? So we have a pretty full docket of conversations going on today, so excited to get into that. Like I said, we'll start out with the Dallas Cowboys and Micah Parsons situation. So as you can see here, right off the bat, Micah Parsons reports to camp amid unsettled contract. So a couple things I want to discuss here before really diving into the rest of this is really up until yesterday, maybe even the day before, I don't think there was a single time anyone was concerned or worried about the fact that the Dallas Cowboys were going to sign Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons has been very vocal about the fact that he doesn't see his contract situation to be similar to those of TJ Watt, of Trey Hendrickson, really any of those players, because he considers himself, one, to be much younger, have much more ability. You know, he really sees himself as his own person and said, hey, I'm not going to let the other contract noise get in my way. I'm going to be Micah Parsons. I'm going to get my deal. I'm not concerned about that. So that was his sentiment really up until yesterday, really, maybe the day before that. And so really kind of what happened from there, and to kind of dive into it a little bit more, um, Jerry Jones, takes a shot at both Micah Parsons as well as his quarterback, Dak Prescott. in this same situation. So let me move myself over here real fast so you can see this better. 1 second. So again, Jerry Jones took a shot at both Micah Parsons and Dak Prescott. Seemingly, what he was discussing when he took a shot at them was their availability. Right? He was talking about the fact that as soon as he signed Dak, Dak had a major injury, right? And so what he was essentially saying is, even if we pay these guys, it doesn't mean we actually have them. That could be seen taking a couple ways, right? So first off, I'll kind of talk about how I see the way that Jerry Jones saw this conversation going, and then I'll kind of go from there as to what happened next. So again, Jerry Jones was essentially saying, just because we sign these people doesn't mean we actually have them. And the way that I think Jerry Jones might have been trying to say this was essentially saying, hey, it doesn't matter just because we give them a contract, they still need to be available and be healthy, right? And he was saying Micah Parsons, he missed 6 games last year, which is first off incorrect, right? I believe it was actually 4 from what I actually heard. But Jerry Jones nonetheless said six games is how many games Micah Parsons missed last year. Dak obviously has had injury issues in the past as well. So I understand his argument, right? He's essentially saying, hey, we have to consider, the best interests of the team and of the organization, and just because we pay them doesn't mean they're available. Like, we have to evaluate all possibilities, right? I can understand saying that. The timing of this, though, is terrible. You're basically going into training camp, the start of training camp. When he said this, he was on a radio show right before training camp kicked off, and basically said, hey, like, this isn't a done deal. Like, he was not saying, hey, we are going to sign Micah Parsons. And so Micah Parsons is at camp during all this, right? Another part that I didn't mention when it comes to Micah Parsons leading up to this is he wanted to take more of a leadership role within the Dallas Cowboys. He wanted to be not just the star-studded players with the stats, but also be able to be a leader for this team. And so he showed up to camp regardless of his contract situation, which nowadays is not very common. These players know that the leverage they have is them being there, their availability. And so if they take that away from the team, that's a huge bargaining chip that they have, right? It's a lot easier for the team to say, hey, we didn't get to the deal we were looking to get to, nothing was agreed upon, but you're here, it's time to get to work, right? They eventually they know, like, they will be able to get you on the field, whether it's pressure from your teammates, pressure from coaches, fans, right? When you're already there, you're expected to actually perform. Now, I think some recent things that have really happened from this, and something that I'm curious to see a little bit more, is from what I understand, as soon as these comments came out about Jerry Jones, and I don't think this was going to be the case before he said what he said, but Micah Parsons decided not to practice. He was not on the practice field yesterday after this was said on the radio by Jerry Jones. And so for me, I do think that Jerry Jones making these comments and taking a shot at Micah Parsons made his life a lot harder. Now, Jerry Jones is very rich. He's not one that has shied away from giving good contracts. Now, on the other side of that, the issue is the fact that he didn't necessarily give these contracts out easily, right? So I think Dak Prescott is a perfect example of that. Dak Prescott, I believe, got two franchise tags before he signed his long-term deal with the Dallas Cowboys, and everyone was saying, why are you waiting to sign him? Why are you waiting to sign him? The price tag just keeps going up, right? And this situation with Micah Parsons is another perfect example of that. And what I mean by that is the fact that Micah Parsons is essentially going to reset the market. There's no doubt in my mind he will become the highest paid non-quarterback player in the NFL. So why are you continuing to wait? What is the value in that besides the draw out, besides the drama and the attention. That's really it as a positive, right? I think Jerry Jones is one person that will tell you that, any publicity is good publicity, and I think he makes a point to put the Cowboys in the limelight when it comes to these sorts of situations. I think he sees value in that, right? He sees the value of the TV time and people talking about the Dallas Cowboys, regardless if it's good or bad. TJ Watt just got signed to a $41 million a year contract, right? He went just above Myles Garrett, his opponent in Cleveland, who got paid $40 million a year. Micah Parsons is probably going to get paid more than TJ Watt. He's much younger, and really over the last couple of years has performed, I would say, at a higher level than TJ Watt has the last couple of years. Now, what does that mean for the Dallas Cowboys? Does that mean they're going to have to sign him to a $42 million a year or $41.1 or $41.5 million a year contract? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And most likely Michael Parsons is going to want more guaranteed dollars on the back end as well because he is younger. He can say that, right? I'll kind of go into this really quick. When you look at Micah Parsons and his stats, and I'll go into kind of by the years so you can take a look at this. Micah Parsons has had 10 plus sacks actually his entire career. He had 13 and a half, 14, and then 12 last year. And he only played in 13 games last year, right? And so he's going to reset the market. There is no doubt in my mind that is going to be the case, right? You can take a look at, these sack leaders from last year, right? Trey, Hendrickson, Myles Garrett right there. When it comes to the two highest paid, Micah Parsons is number 5. And again, when you look at Micah Parsons, the key number here isn't just sacks, it's the guy's age, and he's 26 years old, right? That's a huge difference from the rest of these edge rushers. I'll show you this real fast. I know we've actually showed this before. I've gone through this before, and when talking about TJ Watt, and it's actually it's more up to date now. But one of the main things I kind of want to show you here are these ages, right, of these highest paid players. Again, look at these average per year: 41, 40, 35.6, 35.5, 34 million, right? Every single one of these players is 28 or above, right? 31, 30, 31. Micah Parsons, again, he's 26 years old. That's a lot more years of availability that he's going to have. Not to mention, once you fall off pretty hard, especially from an edge rusher perspective. Explosiveness is a huge aspect of being an edge rusher in the NFL. And if you lose that, you're in big trouble. And so being 26 years old, you have a huge advantage when it comes to that. So I'm really curious to see what happens here. Now, if I'm going to give my take on what goes on, one, a lot of this really depends on what Jerry Jones does with the rest of his training camp. If he continues to double down on what he said, or if he decides to stay quiet and, I would say, not hurt the contract negotiations aspect more than he probably already has. Because again, if I'm Micah Parsons, I see those comments. He even retweeted, and I'm not sure if anyone saw this, but when the news broke what Jerry Jones said on that radio show, one of the immediate people to respond to this was J.J. Watt. And J.J. Watt essentially said, what a great way to go into training camp. Taking a shot at your star QB and your star edge rusher. That's really going to help your team out, right? Micah Parsons saw that tweet and retweeted it. He's probably feeling less of a Cowboy than he ever has. He's made comments as recently as yesterday saying, I'm just going to go about my business. If they don't want me, then I'll go elsewhere. He wasn't saying that 2 days ago, right? This is something that has come up and become a topic of conversation recently. And that's an issue for the Cowboys, because if you take Micah Parsons out of this defense, you have a pretty old defense otherwise, right? They're not necessarily a star-studded defense anymore. You have Trayvon Diggs, who, had an injury not too long ago and has really been a solid player for them for a pretty long period of time. But other than that, I mean, who are the guys on the Dallas Cowboys defense? I know they drafted a defensive tackle last year. I think he had some injuries, and so that hurt him. But really, they don't have anyone else that can be a game changer on that defense besides a Micah Parsons. So I think it's important to really discuss that, because in the end, do you want to be in the same spot as the Cincinnati Bengals where you're really just a one-sided team, right? You have this amazing star-studded offense, but at the same time, they don't really have a defense, and their defense is even in even more trouble. Um, yeah, no, that's an interesting topic there, Ashton. I think obviously being listed as a linebacker, I really just think that's just the style of defense. I still would consider him to be a defensive end, even though Micah Parsons was actually a middle linebacker in college. Um, but yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Having the linebacker core, you're right, they do not get the same amount of money that edge rushers get, and so I still don't think you put Micah Parsons in the linebacker category. I don't think really there's many that do, besides the fact that if you're talking about the difference between a 3-4 and a 4-3 defense, right? A 3-4, you would have a linebacker be considered an edge guy, and in a 4-3, you have that defensive end that is more so labeled that edge rusher. But yeah, going into this, the last thing I'll say on this is I don't think that this is going to end soon. After seeing what happened yesterday, I feel like this is going to turn into a little bit more of a scenario that Cincinnati is facing, and I don't think that's a good thing for Dallas, because again, they don't have a super young team. They have an amazing wide receiving core with CeeDee Lamb and with George Pickens now. Their running back their running back room is less than impressive, to say the least. I think that they have like Miles Sanders as potentially their number one running back. I don't think that he's going to be a game changer for them, so they're going to be heavily reliant on that pass on the offensive side, and they're probably going to be even more reliant on the pass, again, similar to what's happened in Cincinnati last year, in the sense that their defense, especially without Micah Parsons, is going to be in a lot of trouble. They're going to have to put up a lot of points in order to win games next year. And guess what? They're also in a really tough division, right? We haven't even talked about that fact. The Cowboys have to face the Washington Commanders and the Philadelphia Eagles twice this year, right? That's 4 Super Bowl caliber games that they're facing, right? Eagles won the Super Bowl, and the Commanders were right there. They faced the Eagles in the NFC Championship. And so you don't have the room for these mistakes. You need Micah Parsons on the field. Again, I don't think this is going to end anytime soon, and I don't see this ending well, potentially. Jerry might decide to take his words back. I don't know if that's ever going to be a thing that Jerry Jones does. He doesn't necessarily do that. He's pretty firm in what he says, but for me, I see this dragging throughout most of training camp. I can imagine a deal either coming in right before the end of training camp and before the end of the season, or I could see it happening next year, and there could be some. I couldn't tell you what Micah Parsons will do. I think Micah Parsons will eventually play. I think that eventually he'll realize that he's 26 years old. It's time to put up some numbers that will get him that deal. It might not end up being with the Dallas Cowboys, but I do think that Micah Parsons will play, but I think this is going to get more and more ugly before he does actually play. So going back to these topics, right? The other topic of conversation is Trey Hendrickson, right? Trey Hendrickson we just went over that graphic. He led the NFL in sacks last year. 17 and a half sacks. He led the NFL. And guess what? He's not showing up to camp right now. Trey Hendrickson was in Cincinnati and left Cincinnati as recently as, I believe, Monday evening. He arrived at his home in Jacksonville, Florida. Right? So he had conversations with the Cincinnati Bengals. The president, Mike Brown, came out and was again also vocal about his displeasure with the contract negotiations with Trey Hendrickson. He called Trey Hendrickson difficult to work with. Could you imagine trying to negotiate with someone? As you can see in this video, a screenshot of Trey Hendrickson's arrival in Florida. Could you imagine being Trey Hendrickson, leading this team in sacks, essentially being the entire defense, right? They have some other solid players. Like, I'll give Dax Hill credit. I'll give Logan Wilson credit. I think he's a great linebacker. But he essentially was their defense last year. And if you don't bring him in, if he does not play with the Bengals, think about this. Joe Burrow had an insane year last year, right? Everyone is still talking about Joe Burrow being a top 3 quarterback. He was on a team that didn't make the playoffs. The only reason they didn't make the playoffs was because of their defense. Their defense was so bad. Like, it was abysmal, right? I mean, as a Ravens fan, I watched Cincinnati lose 2 shootouts to the Ravens, and both were really at the fault of the defense. Joe Burrow has to play perfect, not near perfect. He has to play perfect for the Bengals to win these games. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. You know, if you look at his stats from last year, they were off the charts, and it was because he had to. Now, the other aspect of why his stats were so good again was because the defense was so bad, and they needed to put up a lot of points in order to win. But at the same time, again, he had to play perfect. And so if you lose what was your entire defense last year in Trey Hendrickson, you're going from essentially last place defense to like last place defense. Like, the next team, behind them will be the Alabama Crimson Tide or the Georgia Bulldogs from a college perspective when it comes to rankings. Because not only did they not signed Trey Hendrickson, a lot of people aren't talking about this when it comes to the Trey Hendrickson situation, but I think this is important. Sam Hubbard retired last year for the Bengals. Last year was Sam Hubbard's last year. I still, and maybe this is just me as a Ravens fan, I'll just say this. I think Lamar Jackson retired Sam Hubbard, and I'll tell you why. If you go back to I believe it was the second game that the Bengals, no, sorry, it was the first game. The first game that the Bengals played the Ravens. It ended up going into overtime, but one of the most spectacular plays I've ever seen happen on a football field happened, and it was at the demise of Sam Hubbard. Lamar Jackson took a shotgun snap, dropped the ball immediately, fumbled it around, picked it up, was getting a pass rush right away, dodged one person, and then continued to stiff arm Sam Hubbard, not once, but twice before he ran and jumped. Before he went out of bounds, he jumped and threw the ball up to Isaiah Likely in the end zone for a touchdown. Was the most amazing play in the world. The reason why I say it ended Sam Hubbard's career was, if you watch right after that all happens, Sam Hubbard is on his knees with his hands on his knees, and he's just looking up at the sky, and you could just tell he's saying, "What was that? What am I doing here? There is something different on this field, and it is not me." I truly believe that was the moment when Sam Hubbard decided it was time to go. Now, again, this isn't just about Sam Hubbard. I wanted to just quickly share that because, again, he was a great player for them. He performed at a high level, and he didn't get double-digit sacks by any means, but again, like, their pass rush was their entire defense, and so losing him is huge. Not to mention, right, the other aspect of this and why this is so important, Shemar Stewart also is holding out, right? Their first round pick, 17th pick overall, who's an edge rusher, by the way, was supposed to essentially replace Sam Hubbard, is not reporting to camp either. He's at Texas A&M practicing with them. That's unheard of, right? There's people out there saying Shemar Stewart might go back to college. Think about that. Has anyone ever heard of that? Like, going back to college after being drafted by an NFL team? I definitely have not heard that. So you're talking about Sam Hubbard retiring, Trey Hendrickson holding out, and Shemar Stewart holding out. That's 3 edge rushers that are unaccounted for the Cincinnati Bengals. And I don't know how much more they can withstand not having them on the field. I'm thinking about this, and to me, I'm just thinking, what are you expecting from your defense, right? Like, what do you think your defense is going to be able to do without these players? Rookies, it's extremely vital that they're there at training camp. He's missed mandatory minicamp camp. He held in, right? He was there at the facility, but he wasn't practicing, right? Rookies need training camp more than anyone else. And the fact that Shemar Stewart is not there at training camp with them is a huge issue. The Shemar Stewart situation, just to get into a little bit further, because if you hadn't seen another video about this, I'll share with you. Shemar Stewart isn't like sitting out for more money or more guaranteed money. Shemar Stewart is essentially sitting out in order to get a specific clause out of his contract, and this is a new I would say amendment, or this is a new clause in contracts that Cincinnati is trying to incorporate. I think they've signed a couple people with this, and other teams have been doing this around the league, but it's not popular. Essentially what it says is, if you do anything contract detrimental to the team, we can void any future guaranteed dollars, right? So essentially, let's say he gets in trouble or does something wrong in his rookie season, his second and third and fourth year, and that that 5th year option can be completely voided, right? So as a player, guaranteed dollars is really all that your contract is. I talked about this a little bit before, but I think that this is important to mention when it comes to these contracts and sort of what's happening around the NFL as a whole. NFL teams for the longest time have not necessarily looked at contracts from the entirety of what you're actually seeing, right? And what I mean by that is you have like a structure of a contract. It could be 5 years, we'll call it $100 million just to make it simple, right? They can have a contract that is 5 years, $100 million, but they could only have 20 million of that being fully guaranteed. To these teams, that's a 5-year, $20 million contract, or depending on the structure of it, we'll say a 1-year, $20 million contract, right? Essentially what that would mean is probably the first year is fully guaranteed, but nothing else beyond that is fully guaranteed. Shemar Stewart and Trey Hendrickson are fighting the same battle from that perspective. What I'm hearing about the contract dispute with Trey Hendrickson is he is looking for at least 3 years fully guaranteed. And from what I understand, the Bengals are really only offering 1 year fully guaranteed. He's willing to go less guaranteed money, a smaller contract, if it means he gets more years guaranteed. And he's not getting that. The Bengals aren't pushing from 1. Shemar Stewart is fighting the same concept in the sense that they are not allowing him to have a fully guaranteed deal, right? There's a chance that some of it can be voided, and he's trying to avoid that. And And so that's how the teams look at this. And so now the players the players have caught up to this whole concept. And that is why year after year, you see these players that signed 5-year deals, but 2 or 3 years into it, they're already looking for a new contract because they know their guaranteed money is almost up. And that's really what the value is of the contract to them, right? The 5 years, $100 million, it sounds nice, but if it's really only $20 million guaranteed, it's really only a 1 year, $20 million deal. And and so they're having to face that on a pretty regular basis. And it's now, like I said, now the players have really caught up to this. Um, I think the other aspect of this is the fact that there's the drama around it. Again, right? Jerry Jones said what he said about Micah Parsons. Again, Mike Brown, the team president, has vocalized that he thinks what Shemar Stewart is doing is foolishness, right? He has essentially called his first round pick foolish before he's even stepped on the field. This guy's not even getting paid by you yet. He hasn't gotten a single dollar from the Cincinnati Bengals. He was drafted 17th overall though, and so there's obviously a desire for for him to play for you, but he doesn't feel that love from a contract perspective. He's saying, "Hey, you want to do that contract thing? Give it to someone else. I'm not signing that," and he's held to it. A rookie first rounder sitting out to this day for a contract dispute is almost unheard of now because these things are like slotted, right? The amount you get paid fully guaranteed has become the new thing in the first round. This is very unprecedented, but this is what's going on. Everyone's getting these fully guaranteed deals now in the first round. But he's saying like, hey, like if my deal is fully guaranteed, I want it to be fully guaranteed. I don't want you to be able to void that ability because again, your deal is only as good as your guaranteed dollars. And so when you have Mike Brown calling him foolish and taking shots at Trey Hendrickson, who is an upstanding guy, right? Like, there has been no one that has said anything bad about Trey Hendrickson or Shemar Stewart for that matter, right? I saw Shemar Stewart get interviewed earlier in the summer. It was right around mandatory minicamp, and I mean, he was very bluntly honest. Like, he said some things I was shocked, right? He essentially said it seems like Cincinnati Bengals are in the business to be right, not to win games, is what he said. So I can see why Mike Brown is probably not the most happy with him, right? Trey Hendrickson has also been vocal with the media, but he hasn't taken any shots. He's essentially saying, hey, you guys have told me the last 2 off seasons you're going to take care of me. I am now I'm not even close to being paid one of the top edge rushing positions. And so with that comes a lot of trouble. Ashton, so coincidence that the 3D situations, Watt, Cincinnati, and Parsons, the only one that's been resolved seemingly amicably is the team that perennial contenders. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The Steelers, I wasn't too worried about them signing Watt. I was a little concerned about the length and how much guaranteed he was going to get. Actually, I don't know if you saw, but I thought it was really cool that Watt actually got $108 million fully guaranteed, which is the amount of career sacks he's actually gotten. So I think there was a lot that was there's a lot of thought that was put into the TJ Watt deal. That was very clear to me. And yeah, the Pittsburgh Steelers, they are a perennial contender, and there's a reason why Mike Tomlin has been there as long as he has. The continuity of that organization, Cincinnati cannot contend with that, right? That's obviously a huge, that's a real thing. Dallas has the aura, but I would not put their organization at the same level as the Pittsburgh Steelers either, right? I think they do a good job of staying relevant and people thinking this is their year and all of that, but I wouldn't put the Dallas organization at the same level of Pittsburgh's either. But yeah, like going into this just like a little bit further, I really do think that Trey Hendrickson is done in I think he's done in Cincinnati. I think we saw the last of him. It's become very obvious based off of the offers that he's gotten. I've heard as low as like $28 million a year is what he's been offered. Um, I think that is going to be. I think we might have seen the end of Trey Hendrickson in a Cincinnati Bengal jersey. And so, with that being said, one being traded, what do they actually get for him? I mean, if I'm them, I'm trading for defensive players, or I hate to say this, but Joe Burrow, like with what they just paid Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T Higgins, right? They're sort of in like a win now scenario. Burrow's, um, I'm not saying Joe Burrow's career is near the end whatsoever. They're sort of in a win now situation though with how much money they paid. But I mean, if I'm the Bengals, I'm trying to get as many draft picks out of Trey Hendrickson as possible if things go the way that I think they are. Again, I don't think Trey Hendrickson is going to be in a Bengals jersey this year or ever again based off of what's happened. I don't think Cincinnati's willing to pay him what he wants. I don't think they have the money to do it, if I'm being honest. Cincinnati is a team that had to sell their naming rights of their stadium in order to pay Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow, like everyone in Cincinnati calls it the Joe Burrow, like pay Joe Burrow Stadium. That is what they call their stadium after they had to sell the rights to it. So, I think that's something that's kind of important to also factor into this is that maybe they just don't have the actual ability, and so yeah, the thing they're going to have to do to make this work is trade him. And if I'm trading him, I'm trying to get as many first and second round picks as possible if they are able to get that, right? Again, he's older, right? He's not young, but I still think someone would be willing to give up a first round pick for him if they're a contender and able to get to the Super Bowl. All right, back to the Saints, Ashton. We'll talk about the Saints, all right? We'll talk about the Saints. Specifically, we're going to talk about my guy, the Honey Badger, right? I'll move myself over here. Honey Badger retires. This is big news in the NFL. I'm a huge Honey Badger fan, right? First off, let me say that. I would say the peak of my college football viewing and enjoyment was watching Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger at LSU. There's very few players that I can say I've had the joy of watching more than someone like a Tyrann Mathieu. I think I would put him at the excitement level of watching Reggie Bush at USC. That is how polarizing his career was at LSU, right? So I'm just talking about college right now, right? But that is not just it when it comes to the Honey Badger, right? There's a lot more to him. And I'll just go through this really quick, right? So first off, he's a Super Bowl champion. He won a Super Bowl with the Kansas City Chiefs. He has a ring, which is obviously the pinnacle of anyone's career. He's a 3-time All-Pro. He won All-Pro awards or recognition in 2015, 2019, and 2020, right? And he actually was he was second team All-Pro in 2019 as well. I think that was actually for a different position. I believe that could have been special teams. 3-time Pro Bowler, 2015, 2020, 2021. He made the 2010s All-Decade team for the NFL, and he had 36 career interceptions. So, again, that is a what I would consider to be like a marquee career in the NFL. The NFL average career is about 2.5 years. And so for him to make it as long as he did, is super impressive. Let's take a look right now. He started it back in 2000. Let me actually zoom out real fast. He started out in 2013 with the Arizona Cardinals, spent a year with Houston, then he went to the Chiefs, and then finally the Saints, his hometown. But that's an 11-year career. That's impressive. First off, just that alone, right? Shout out my boy Will Compton. year 10, right? Everyone, if you can get to year 10, you've had an illustrious career. People know who you are, and people will remember who you are for a long time, and you're going to be respected around the NFL. I mean, even before 10 years you are, but I'm just saying that is not easy to have a career that long, right? And, it wasn't just interceptions that he was successful in, right? It was causing fumbles, it was sacks. He's known as a great tackler, right? He's a very physical player. And so Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger, retiring from the NFL is a sad era for me. I'll be honest. I truly enjoyed watching him play. He's someone that I wanted the Ravens to draft, right? I knew there was zero shot we were going to get him because he was going to go high. I knew that. He had some off the field situations happening at the time, but I still figured, he would be drafted really early. But he was a dog. He was a guy that anyone would want to have on their team. I don't think, I think people tried to paint a picture that he had some off the field issues, but he really became a cornerstone of every single team he played for. The other aspect that I'm going to talk about is this number, the first number you see, right? GP, which means games played, right? Besides really the beginning of his career in Arizona, he didn't miss many games at all. Maybe a couple in Kansas City, but he played every single game for the Saints. Sorry, Ashton, 17 games is the amount of games you guys had every single year, unfortunately, because you wouldn't make the playoffs. But he played all 17 games for the Saints all 3 years of his career. And there wasn't really that much of a drop-off, right? It definitely slowed down a little bit. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the Saints weren't necessarily the best team, but he was consistently available. Again, going back to what Jerry Jones said, right? Just because you sign someone doesn't mean you're going to have them, but at the same time, he was always available. The best ability is availability, and Tyrann Mathieu is a great picture of that. And so hats off to Tyrann Mathieu. I could talk about him the rest of the day, to be completely honest. I'm happy for him. It seems to me, and one more thing I'll say on this is, it seems to me this was probably one of those situations, and I talked about Mike Williams on Monday retiring. I felt like probably what happened was he was supposed to go to camp, and he just didn't have it in him. Right? There are always players like that every single year that this happens to. I don't think the Saints were necessarily expecting this one. It makes a little bit of sense to me as to when it happened, but I think Tyrann Mathieu was probably starting to pack his bags, say goodbye to his family, and just didn't have it in him. Because, again, every single year you start this, like, it is a commitment. You're not with your family a lot, right? You're taking a toll mentally, physically especially, right? It is not easy for these players to do what they're doing. That's why they get paid so much money. Besides the fact that you have crazy people like me that just watch it at nauseum and will talk about it for days on end. But yeah, I mean, this is gonna hurt the NFL. This is gonna hurt the Saints. I don't think they had much of a team and a hope regardless, but he will be missed in the NFL. And hats off to Tyrann Mathieu. Couple little quick hitters to sort of sign off for the day. Something that I think is important to discuss, because I think that the Detroit Lions are an important team this year. And I'll move myself over here. That's kind of annoying. Sorry. But Alex Anzalone, disappointed with contract talks with the Lions. So Alex Anzalone, he's been very consistent for the Lions, right? He's been a part of their entire, I'll call it a glow up, if you will, but the entire rise of this Detroit Lions team, he has been a part of, and a big part of it as well, especially from a culture perspective. I know that in the locker room around the league, he is a very respected player. People like him as a person, as a leader, as a player. And here's the sad truth about it, right? And I'll point this out real quick. He is finishing up a 3-year contract. I'm trying to remember. I saw it. Yeah, so he's in his final year of an $18 million contract, right? And then he is 30 years old again, so age might be a factor in this. But I don't think this is the real factor when it comes to Alex Anzalone, right? Something else that I think, and I'm sure Dallas fans aren't familiar with this, but I'll talk about this, is the fact that, with success comes loss, right? I've seen this happen so many times. You look at the Philadelphia Eagles defense, right? Everyone's talking about how their roster is really good this year regardless, but they still lost a lot of players, right? They lost, I mean, they lost, I think, 2 cornerbacks, a defensive end, a defensive tackle, and I think a linebacker, right, from their defense to free agency. And that has an impact on any team. Generally, when you make a Super Bowl, when you make the playoffs regularly, and you're a player performing on that team, you get noticed. And you also you can demand more money because you've seen that success, not just on a personal level, but on a team level. You get wrapped up in that success, and people look at you as successful. And so the sad truth is the Detroit Lions have been rising so much and have improved so much that they have so many young players. I'm thinking about the Jahmyr Gibbses of the world. I'm thinking about the Aiden Hutchinsons. Those players. There's a cornerback it's escaping my mind right now that they drafted, right? Not like a year or 2 ago. They know they're going to have to pay these players in order to continue their success, and they're going to need to invest in their young core. And sadly, players like Alex Anzalone are going to be victims to that success, right? He's not going to get a contract with the Detroit Lions probably because they know they need the money for other people. At the age he's at, he's probably unfortunately going to be someone that has to get let go because of his age. And so I'm curious to see what he does with this. If I'm Alex Anzalone, I think this is just something where you have to understand, like, this is the way the NFL is going to go. And I know he's saying he's disappointed, but at the same time, he's probably going to get paid somewhere else. He'll get another shot somewhere unless he really falls off this year. I think, he's disappointed because he wants to be a part of the team that he's helped develop the current culture and makeup of. But unfortunately, that's not how this business works sometimes. And so for Alex Anzalone, what I would say is, keep your head up. I think you'll have success in Detroit this year, and you'll have the ability to go to another team next year and probably be on like a 1 or 2 year deal moving forward for the rest of your career until you decide to hang up the cleats. I'm curious to see what happens there. Not really sure if we'll see more news about Alex Anzalone for the rest of training camp. I think that he was asked about it and being on the Detroit Lions, which is now a more polarizing team. Good for them for that. But I think he's just going to have to understand the situation that he's in. But that's all for me today. Really appreciate everyone listening, everyone watching, joining in. Ashton, appreciate all of your comments. That's it for me today, though. Please, again, like, subscribe, comment. Tell me what you think of my content, good or bad. You can just be honest with me. Tell me topics that you might want me to cover. Apparently, I'm going to cover the Saints for a full episode, as well as potentially the New Orleans Pelicans, but we'll see how that goes. But I appreciate everyone's day today. This is Bad Takes from Bad Takes and